This is The Business of Architecture. Helping architects conquer the world. And here's your host, Enoch Sears.
So hey there, Architectos, Business of Architecture podcast. Welcome. I have the honor of having Hilary Scruggs with us today. She is the founder of Operative Ventures, and we're in for a real special treat today because Hilary is just one of those amazing people that you never forget. She and I went to school together, and she didn't know I was going to say this about her, by the way, but she is just rocking stuff, and I've always looked up to her and everything she's done. So she is going to tell us about her story, what she's been doing lately, and she is actually developing projects right now. So with that intro, welcome, Hilary, and thanks for doing the interview.
Thank you, Enoch, and thank you for the kind words. That's really, really kind. Really kind, and I'm happy to be here on your podcast, and I'm excited to catch up with you after many years and to talk a little bit about business of architecture.
That's right. So what you've done, and we talked a little bit, you've done a lot of work to get where you're at, and you've just busted your butt, And first of all, I just want to tell everyone, Hilary developed a project called the Bering project. But let's take it back. Before that, Hilary, let's just sort of jump into it and talk about, what you did after school, sort of how you got to where you are, and tell us a little about yourself so people can get to know you.
Okay. Well, I did my bachelor's with Enoch, of course, at Cornell University and graduated in 2003. And I knew I wanted to be in architecture from an early age. So it was a compelling experience just being there at Cornell. And when I got out, I was a little burned out. So I went home for a while and then ended up home to Texas and ended up in New York City later that year, where I got a job in high-end residential for a young sort of startup firm. And I did like lofts and townhouse projects and stuff in New York City. It was a great way to learn about construction. It was a great way to learn about design. And I left that in around 2006 when I was 26 years old, thinking I was going to do some freelancing. And I've been working for myself ever since, because I ended up working for some clients for a couple more years in New York City. Meanwhile, I was investing in some real estate in San Antonio, Texas, because I happened to visit a few times over those years, and I could see there was a downtown that was really just on the verge of kind of emerging, and wanted to be back in Texas and do something kind of for myself. So in 2008, when the economy kind of got tough, I was wrapping up some big projects, and I thought it's a great time to try something a little bit idealistic, to sort of explore sustainability, which had not been a big part of, projects in places like the Hamptons and Greenwich, Connecticut, So I came down here and did that project, and it was a development project. It was 2 units on a single property, a duplex, and it was LEED Silver. And out of that experience, I met some wonderful people, and it started this firm in San Antonio, Texas. So that's sort of the story. Hopefully
that's awesome. Well, there's a lot of meat there. To dissect. That is, and that's what I love about the profession of architecture. And the design and everything is that there's so many paths that we can take.
I think so, and I think it's really scary when you first get out on your own, but it is rewarding, and it makes you tough, and it's a great way to really engage about whatever really interests you about the profession, and kind of personalize your path.
Yeah. So tell me, let's go back a little bit. When you were in New York City, of course, New York City is happening. If there's a hot spot for architecture design, it's New York City.
Yeah.
And you said, I'm interested when you said that you broke away and you decided to do some freelance things. Can you tell us, how did you find the work to be able to go out and do some?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was referred to these people. I mean, my main project had been a project. It's a really large, multi-million dollar addition, and it was a young kind of hip client, and she had a great architect working with her, and he did a fabulous job, but she really wanted to be involved in the process, and she ended up bringing me on as kind of a design consultant. And between the two of us, we worked to really develop the interiors, to develop a lot of things in tandem with the architect. So I kind of found this position, that was a large enough position that I could sustain myself. And it was originally going to be like 6 months. It turned into 2 years, and, clients and projects kind of just seemed to be coming my way. Yeah. Mainly, I mean, out of the projects I had done with this firm, I had just met a lot of people, and people wanted to continue working with me,
Great. So you established those connections in the firm you're working at. The people knew you, and then that was your network that allowed you.
Yes, the contractors, the vendors, the consultants we used. In some cases, the clients we had, just different people kind of made a network.
Yeah. Okay. Now,
New York is a great place where I feel like, because so many people are from somewhere else there, I had the experience, I think a lot of young people in New York get this experience where you somehow find a niche and people come in and embrace you. It's unique.
Interesting. So would you have any suggestions for architects that want to move out, maybe new graduates want to move out to New York City, or people that want to get involved in the scene out there?
Yeah, I would say you just jump in and
knock on doors?
Yeah, I would say, find the best job you can, and hook up with good people who you admire. And my grandfather told me, it was good advice, keep your head down and your tail up, just kind of like get into it, learn some skills, and pretty much you're like the Energizer Bunny, like once you kind of find your niche.
That sounds like that's like a good Texas saying. Was your grandfather from Texas?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. He was full of Texas wisdom. Unfortunately, he passed away about 2 years ago, and we miss him, but he was a character, and he was a successful businessman. So some of that, those country down home Texas wisdom, it probably pays off.
Yeah. Good. Carry on the legacy.
Yeah.
So you're working, you're freelancing, and then you decide to buy some property in San Antonio.
Right. So, once I got out on my own, obviously I was responsible for my own time and my own hours. And so I had time to take, long weekends or research trips and kind of look into these things. And I had been to San Antonio actually with my grandparents on a Christmas they wanted to get away, and I went with them, and I was pretty amazed by the downtown and what looked like it was starting to happen there. It's a charming place. It's a very colorful place. There's a lot of authenticity here. And so then I had been back for the AIA convention, which was here in 2006 or 7. And that's when I just bought my first property. Actually, it was a terrible convention goer. I basically found a real estate agent and went to some parties, it was kind of bad.
Nice.
But I found that property, and I started thinking about doing something there, and started kind of watching, the market, and as things were kind of dipping and getting slow, I found another property and then another, and while I was still in New York. So I was trying to figure out at first, how was I going to do anything when I was in New York, and land is not, so that's kind of
nice.
Yeah.
So obviously New York was great for the design, the experience, the actual architectural products that happen up there. But in terms of doing your own thing, I mean, if you want to develop something, you're competing with like Donald Trump and
Oh yeah.
Barbara Corcoran and
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at a lot of like Atelier Bow Wow and Sue Fujimoto, or I can't remember his name because I'm terrible, and like some of these small scale Japanese projects, and I kind of had a heart for that anyway. Now, yeah, I mean, for me to buy, buildable land in Manhattan would be pretty much out of reach. So
yeah.
I kind of decided to trade, that dynamic, context for a place where I could kind of like, zone in on my own thing.
And how instrumental was the real estate agent in finding the location? Because we always hear real estate, location, location, location.
I mean, I knew which area I wanted.
And how did you know that?
Because I had driven around this area. There's an area, right immediately next to downtown. And I also saw that there had been some local architects who had done some cool things. And I had a gut that, that this was a good buy, because it seemed pretty obvious from the areas. And San Antonio is not that huge, at least the downtown area. You can kind of drive it and understand it relatively easily. And I mean, I had been to Austin and I had once actually before I moved to New York thought about doing some stuff similar to what I'm doing now in Austin. And what's happened in the south of Austin, and you've probably been, I'm not sure, but south of Austin has been this explosive over the last 2 decades. And to me, this area where I bought was like, this is exactly what that was. And so I just kind of impulsively was like, this is where I'm gonna do something.
Excellent. So I've noticed that in the conversations we've been having, or other people that I've had talked to, seeing the future potential, trying to find the area that's the next, South Austin, place that's exploding right now with energy.
Yeah.
So you found it, and it's worked out well for you. I mean, I talked to you, and you said that you're starting to see the growth that you had hoped you would see in that area.
It's incredible. I mean, when I bought like my first property, it was kind of like, looking back, I'm just like, I can't believe how I thought that was a good idea. I mean, there was a warehouse next door that was industrial, and it was completely like vacant and like distressed from years of delayed maintenance. There's like a parking lot with like barbed wire around the fence, and there's like, windows, knocked out of houses and stuff. I knew that in the general area, like, things were happening, but now I guess it's not about 6 years later, that warehouse is like this wonderful, it's been done up by a local architect. It looks great. It's like a local business has taken it over and it's really nicely done. The parking lot has all been re-landscaped. There's like an amazing restaurant across the street where you go and, have very expensive dinner, and it's just written up in Texas Monthly, and it's completely changed over that time. And I can't take credit for anything. I feel like I was a little. I guess my gut was right, but maybe also that was being young enough to and that I my appetite for risk was a little bit more.
Well, and people can go and they can see this neighborhood and they can see the project. The address is on Bering Street, and the exact address is 110
and 114 Bering.
110 and 114 Bering. So I did go and look that up on Google Street View, and you can see that it's definitely what I would call a marginal neighborhood. It's.
Oh yeah, that property I was describing before was not Bering, but yeah.
Okay.
There's Bering is a little bit outside, and it's. Some of the people who've been there have been there for generations. It's an interesting place. People who just literally stayed in the same place, but even around there are several warehouses that have been built up by a developer from New Jersey. There's, stuff that's in the works there. That's just a little bit further out than the first property.
Okay.
But yeah, it's still a neighborhood in transition.
Nice. So let's take it step by step. That first property that you bought, Hilary, how much did that cost you?
I think I paid $160,000.
Okay. And was that a land loan, or did you pay that in cash?
I paid it in cash.
Okay.
And
so a 26-year-old, how'd you have, if you don't mind sharing, how'd you have $160,000?
I had it. Just had it, I mean, my family had been generous, and I had made money, and I mean, some of that was cash that I made actually myself.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I did, and
so I guess a good question is, let's see. So you had some, because that's a big roadblock for a lot of initial architects that I've talked to, and they're always like, well, I'd like to develop, but it's the initial capital. So do you have any pointers for, if you were able to, some people say, no, I won't work with family at all. Did it work well for you to accept some family funds to help do that, or how'd that work out for you?
Yeah, that came into play with Bering. I was basically, when it came to the construction itself, I did not have the cash to do it. I was helped out by my mother and my grandmother, and it worked out pretty well. I mean, I would say, my family has been extraordinarily supportive, and I did give them a sort of guarantee for it, and they knew that I could handle a loan of the size, or that basically they kind of made for me. It was, partly just the lending situation made it kind of impossible to get money from a bank or from a conventional, route.
Yeah.
I definitely now, as I weigh out decisions, look at the financing, in some ways I'm a little bit leery. I'm glad that, the any kind of interest or, loans that I have are relatively minimal and easy to keep on top of. I think that, had I been, I'm not sure really if it would have turned out so well if it had been a different time where money was super available, and I'm especially at an age where I was naive and over-eager to get started, and confident that, there was this great thing I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Looking back in hindsight, the conservatism that I was forced to practice because, the possibility of going and getting, $1 million is not there,
Yeah.
Was probably a good thing.
So what was the name of your first project? The very first one, that first plot of land that you bought for 160?
That's actually the Maison Divine. And it's a 5-unit live-work project that we are shooting to start this year, actually. Supposed to go back to the Historic Design Review Committee in another, hopefully, March 20th to kind of get our final approvals with that so we can put the permitting process in order. And,
okay, awesome.
And so very soon we're going to have to think about how we're going to finance that one.
Yeah, that'll be a follow-up maybe. Do a little follow-up interview, figure out how that's going.
Yeah, exactly.
So the first parcel land you bought was not the first parcel you developed?
No, because it was an expensive piece of land,
yeah.
And it's a bigger project, and I kind of, at the time, originally I was thinking I was going to do that first, and I decided that the smaller one was a better one to take, because it was 2008 partially, and, it seemed
What was the other one?
The Bering project.
Okay, so Bering was your first development project.
Yes.
Yeah.
It wasn't the first property I bought. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. And you, I mean, the Bering project is a beautiful project. You know, I think you pulled out the design, you pulled out your education, your experience, and you just created a gem. You know, and so I definitely encourage everyone to go and check out Hilary's project. You can visit at operativeventures.com, right, is the name of your firm. And then there's actually and this is really cool too. I think a lot of architects need to look at what you're doing because you've incorporated video in a phenomenal way in the marketing and sort of documentation of your project. So where can they go to find those videos? Because I watched them and they're really cool.
Well, thank you. It's southtowngreenbound.com, and that was a project with Jeff Sherrar of Sherrar Studios, and it goes through sort of the story of making it, and with some commentary from one of my tenants and a local developer and the architectural and the sustainability consultant that we used and a local real estate agent. So it has some interesting things to say.
It sure does, and you actually have an interview there. I love it with one of the tenants one of the inhabitants. Vance, I think is his name.
Vance, yeah, is great, and he is so colorful, and definitely I would check out the individual video with him. There's a little short clip that you can click on separately, and it's funny because he talks about running into the building with his truck, and the fact that he doesn't recycle, and all the real picture.
So I think if you haven't seen Hilary's project, the Bering project yet, you'll understand about the truck part. But if you go and look at it, the building is completely enveloped in a metal screen, and so they have a very metallic look, and so it's quite a visual image to think of this truck running into this metal building. But he said it stood up to the abuse, right?
I know. I mean, he really tried his best to kind of take it down, but he did not succeed.
So here in California we have earthquakes. In Houston, I know they have hurricanes. I guess in San Antonio they have Vance's truck.
Yeah, Vance's truck in the South Texas heat, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. So these are both rental units, Hilary, is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So the rental units, and you have and there's two units. They're actually duplexes, but they're not connected. Tell us a little bit about the program of the project and how you came to all that.
They're 1,500 square feet each, 2-bedroom, 2.5 baths. And they're mirror images of each other. One faces like a back rear parking courtyard, and one faces the street. And in between there are 2 courtyards. So the bottom floor is kind of an open living space. It has a kitchen that's kind of open to the main living, and it sort of has an alcove that's sort of a flex room. It could be an office or, workout room, little den thing. And upstairs there's a laundry room and 2 bedrooms and 2 walk-in closets and 2 baths.
Excellent. So it's set up for, with the 2 baths, it's set up for potentially to have roommates share it. You could have 2 families there, 2 individuals.
I did originally set it up. They're evenly sized. So I set it up originally thinking that maybe there would be a roommate sort of situation.
Has that turned out to be the case?
No, actually, it hasn't been the case. Turned out to be, a couple lives in one and Vance in the other, and there were no roommates. It's useful for a guest room, I guess, or, storage and stuff.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
So this plot of land what was the zoning? When you went and you bought this piece of land, was it zoned to be able to support those 2 duplexes as rentals?
I think that it was in our zoning. I mean, it was either R4, R3, or R2, so it could accommodate a duplex, but it was basically single family.
Yeah. So it was by right. You didn't have to go through any special planning commission to be able to put those duplexes on there.
No, what it was in what they have in San Antonio is a neighborhood conservation district, and it's a district with certain design criteria that you have to follow. So, for example, I had the front porch was a requirement. There was a requirement about the proportions of the windows. There were, and the pitch of the roof, and some of these things. And actually, the screen kind of was inspired by that because I was really kind of not happy about having to do the windows the way they were making me do the windows, but I was allowed to have this screen porch. So I just said, well, let's take the screen and just let's just cover the whole thing with the screen.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Yeah, I was about to ask because you look at the building, you can't even see the windows unless it's nighttime and the lights are on, right?
Yeah, I didn't want to do those windows.
That is so funny. Well, did they have, I mean,
Mhm.
since you did it according to the code, I guess they couldn't say anything about the fact that you put that screen over it, right?
Oh, no, I mean, it was luckily, I mean, in other areas, there are historic areas, and I do have some property in those. You have to go through a subjective, like, review process with a board. I really far prefer the neighborhood conservation district. It's concrete rules. You follow them and you're okay. But yeah, like a lot of urban neighborhoods, there are a lot of limitations to what you can do and not do because so many people have come in and like sort of taken advantage and, built things that are way out of scale or,
Of course.
whatever. But it backfires sometimes because often I find these guidelines at odds with what I think is right for the design,
Oh yeah, so much. So you bought this piece of land for the Bering project. You put down, and you buy that one cash as well?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And so then when you get ready to build, what's the timeline? You start doing your designs, you get your plans drawn up. Take me through the process of how you got the money to build that project.
Okay. So I think I bought it in like March of 2008. And in the summer, I had rented a house and for 6 months I went back and forth between New York and San Antonio. And I was able to kind of do the preliminary design. And then in January of 2009, I sort of came down and started, I lived here and gave up my apartment in New York. And I guess it took me about 3 months to finish the design and the construction details and everything. And I went through I had it engineered, and I started bidding it and did some value engineering and fixing stuff. But I think it took me a good 6 months to get a permit. I mean, I don't know, they have some pretty strict rules in San Antonio, so that was kind of frustrating. But
And what was paying your bills the time, that 6 months when you were doing this project? Credit cards?
actually, no. I still had some consulting work that I did.
Yeah.
And had some income from some investments.
Okay.
And so that was kind of how I did it,
Yeah. Was it pretty tight, or was it comfortable?
It was, well, I would say it was tight. I mean, but it was not, I wouldn't say that I feel like, I was okay and not,
Sure. So you have the plans, and you got the permit for those, and then the next step was subcontractors, bidding out to subcontractors, or you are a design build firm, correct?
Yes. So
Okay.
I planned on, I'm going to do this myself. And I was going to sub out a lot of it. And I ended up finding some local labor who were really smart and really good. And they ended up doing a lot of it, including Waylon, who's on the Southtown Greenbound video, was my project manager, and he was extraordinary and has stayed with me. And but I started doing like some fences, some stuff like that on the lot, just little things. Mm. But basically through the summer, I was pretty much stalled. And as far as financing goes, I mean, it was 2009. I basically had no job, I'm sitting here trying to find, several $100,000 to do it. And what we ended up doing was doing a collateralized line of credit. I mean, I basically went to the bank, and it was a bank that my family's used in Houston, and a good bank. And they were just like, we're not loaning on real estate, period. There's no speculative lending at all. Like, we don't care who you are. You can't have anything. And I was just like, wow, that's really really helpful to know, I'm just like, gosh, I'm learning so much in this great process, And, so what happened was, I mean, I had to collateralize it with some assets, and my mother helped me, and that's what we did, to get it done.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean that speaks volumes about your determination, Hilary, because to be able to take the personal risk on, and this is something that you mentioned to me earlier, is that you've done this the old-fashioned way. You have skin in the game.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Were there any outside investors that you had to bring into that project to make it work?
No, there weren't. I mean, and that was, I mean, that particular project was very personal, and it was about some other things, sort of learning about sustainability and things. I mean, in some ways, a business goal was not the only thing that was kind of like, I was focused on. Now I've learned, which was okay, and I'm glad in hindsight that I decided to do the smaller of the two projects that I had kind of ready to go, because it gave me the ability to do that. But I learned a lot about how important, you can't go into these things kind of like, oh, it's going to be this, it's going to be that, like, we'll just see what I feel like, maybe I'll stay, maybe I'll go, maybe I'll rent it, maybe I'll sell it. It's taught me a lot about, okay, next time I do this, I'm going to set these specific goals, and I'm going to follow those things, and I'm not going to let my kind of unlearning kind of like
Yeah. What are some of the specific goals that you think are essential?
Well, I think that you need to know, for example, are you going to sell it? Are you going to rent it? How long are you going to hold this piece of property? That's not something you figure out as you go along, because there are there are things that you have to do in advance of kind of starting that you just have to have figured out. And that is all the more true when there are multiple parties invested, because, you just can't have those things fall apart and people are like, well, I had in mind, this is, I also think that in terms of, and maybe partly it's coming to it as somebody who's in design and somebody who's interested in architecture and really cares about what the product is at the end of the day and what that says, to know, well, maybe I don't need to do this thing, or maybe I don't need to do that. I think that especially when you're doing a real estate venture, I mean, I try to hit like 80% of it is a pretty conventional building, and the other 20% is something really special, not necessarily expensive, but maybe expensive in terms of labor or in terms of thought or in terms of material,
Yeah.
But you still need to know the bread and butter conventional, how you build this for, a reasonable amount of cost.
Yeah. What were some mistakes that you say that you made, or maybe missteps that you want to warn other people about that are going to go down this path? That first project.
I would say in general, one thing I would say is like, at the time when I was just eager to get started, maybe I pulled the trigger on things too fast because I just couldn't hold myself back. I'd say one thing is being deliberate, and if something doesn't feel completely right and you're not at peace with it and you don't know you're doing the right thing and it doesn't make sense from all the objective angles, it's okay to just not do anything or wait or delay and not start.
Can you give us an example of that?
Well, I mean, on a small example, I can remember when I was waiting for my permit, like I was like, okay, well, I'm going to make this bamboo, section at the rear of the property. And first I actually did buy like $700 worth of bamboo, which promptly died because there's no irrigation on the property. I did it with my sister, which was ridiculous. But then not only that, after the bamboo died, I just said, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this root barrier in here, and there's going to be this confined, dense area where this bamboo will really take off. And I didn't really know what I was doing, so I had like copied a beam that was meant to support like a hold wall, because I had read somewhere that you need like a 3-foot beam to like contain this bamboo. And I did it with my own labor, like, and with my own concrete truck and everything. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so great, that I'm just doing this thing. And it was ridiculously expensive. And then at the end of the day, what do I figure out? Oh, you can't have bamboo on a LEED rated project because it's an invasive species. And that's one of the criteria that you can't have in your landscaping to get your points or whatever. So here's this, giant, several $1,000s piece of concrete in the ground with LED lights that do not work that I'm actually getting fixed right now.
So is it going to be a koi pond, swimming pool?
Well,
planter?
I know. Now it's just a flower bed. It has these great old palms.
Nice.
It has a number of white. I decided it was going to be all white flowers, but it's never really been ever what it's supposed to be.
Wow. But I bet your foundations are amazing. I mean, after getting that trial run, I bet your concrete work is top notch.
That root barrier is there for whoever,
For posterity.
It'll be there long after we're gone.
Nice. So it sounds like you're talking a little bit about the sort of pull between the design and the budget.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, as architects or as designers, we're always a little separate. If we're not paying the bills, there's always a little bit of detachment of how much does this really cost. So how have you found that developing your own projects has influenced that sort of teeter-totter?
Well, being in design build is great to kind of get a handle on what things cost because we have the relationships and we have the infrastructure to find out and, send things out. Now, it's I did things internally as I'm doing things, to kind of figure out if we're on target. I think that it takes some experience with whatever building system you're using or, to kind of understand. I mean, we've explored SIPs, for example, and really haven't been able to figure out we love the system. We really want to use it, but how to use it, at a way that in a way that makes sense.
Is it just cost effectively? Is it just because the price point's higher?
Yeah, when we priced out SIPs compared to conventional framing with spray and insulation, it was still significantly more expensive to do the SIPs.
Yeah.
I think that in certain types of buildings or forms, I would be interested in using SIPs, for example, as a roof or something like that, because I think that in a situation like that, it would save steps and actually would be cost effective. But doing it as much as I really wanted to do them, they don't seem to make sense for the project that we tried it with, I guess.
Yeah. Now also, you mentioned before how in your particular company, it's not just about the development, it's not just about the money. I mean, you're trying to make better communities, and you have a very heavy focus, an idealistic focus almost, on being sustainable.
Yes, definitely. I think that it's something, and that's why I'm glad that I did such a sustainable project in Bering when we were first learning, that it should be almost part of our culture. I mean, we do work with clients, for example, or that's really not one of my priorities for my house. I mean, it's just not high on my list. I'm comfortable with my energy bills. I just don't want to do it. But there are ways where there are why nots. Why not save here? Why not save there? Why not be conservative, in one way or another? And we also do some furniture and some projects internally where it's been fun. Like, for example, this office that we're in, we reused materials that we demoed off a job, or we, instead of putting things in the dumpster, we saved them and we've reused them. It's created material that we've made things out of and it's, to me, that resourcefulness and that thinking, about building and about design is something that's pragmatic and that's taking advantage of what's in front of you every day. I think that good things can come out of that.
Excellent. So when you have, going back to the Bering project, you have during the construction process, was there anything about working with subcontractors that you think people need to know about that was a big lesson for you when you learned in the building process? Was there any big gotcha moments there?
Gosh. Yeah, I can think of some. I can think of one particular contractor who it turned out to be somebody I had to let go and part ways with, and he was handling a number of trades, and I was the first time I'd ever been confronted with somebody over not a long period of time where I was aware that I had paid him, but he hadn't paid his own labor or his own subs. And I ultimately, I mean, I didn't really, I just told these people, you know, I'm so sorry, thank you for your time, you have to go, you know, and I cleared the site out so that, you know, they wouldn't waste any more of their time. And I called them over and I told them that, you know, that just wasn't right. And
yeah.
You know,
So make sure your contractors. So you got to make sure your contractors paying their guys, basically.
Yeah, definitely. You don't want to be in a situation where, you know, that you're paying for somebody else's project and somebody else is paying for yours. You know, that was what I was getting the sense that was going on, you know, and that lack of professionalism. I mean, especially when you're working for a client and you're, you know, can expose people to all kinds of problems. It's just not okay.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So now you have the project built. Did you do? You financed it with a collateralized line of credit, and then did you do a takeout loan?
No.
Okay. So, so how are you? This loan that you got, I'm just trying to get an idea of what's the financial strategy now. So are your renters paying back the loan, or?
Yeah. They're paying back.
Okay. Interesting.
Basically.
Okay. And I mean, the interest rate works out and everything, so it works out for you. Because I haven't never heard of anyone doing that before, using a fully collateralized loan. That's an interesting strategy.
Yeah, I mean, the interest rate is basically tagged on whatever that, it's like 2 points or whatever, it's tagged to whatever the minimum.
The 10-year treasury or something.
Yeah, whatever that term is for that number.
Yeah.
And so it's a reasonable, you know, interest rate to pay. It gives you some flexibility. It kind of protects your own assets because you can't spend them, which is good. You know, sometimes. I mean, I wouldn't say it's the ideal thing, especially when you do have a good idea and you want to expand faster. But I would say.
Okay.
I would say for me at the age and at the experience level that I was at, it turned out to be the right thing. And if I could go back in time and could have, you know, acquired a loan, I don't know that necessarily I would have taken conventional financing, you know?
Okay. Interesting. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So let's see if we can switch up, because we're almost up against our time deadline here, but there's 2 more questions I want to ask you, Hilary, if that's all right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first one was, we talked a little bit before about the fact that design, and this is a quote for you, I'm just going to read it off here. You say, concerning residential design has been highly popularized, and then you start talking about how a lot of the people you work with, you know, they're watching Home and Garden TV, they're watching these remodel programs, and they're on house.com, you know, they're seeing the top design, and they're no longer the people that grew up in suburbia, but they're actually seeing that. So how is that changing the practice of architecture and the kind of people you work with in an overall sense, I guess? What's your thought on that?
Well, I think that you especially when it comes to residential work, you know, there was a day when, like, unless you know, went on the grand tour of Europe or whatever and saw this amazing architecture and came back to, you know, and built your palace and, you know, or whatever, you wouldn't have considered yourself somebody who is savvy about architecture. Now it's like everywhere. Design and architecture are everywhere. People, you know, identify themselves, you know, with lookbooks on Pinterest and whatever that's about their style and it's about their lifestyle. And I find that clients frequently have and I've worked with a lot of great clients who have a very clear, very, very specific idea of how they want their project to feel. You know, they just don't have the ability to carry it through. And I mean, I think that acting as somebody who can, you know, to me, I like the challenge of fitting a house around a client, even if there's like I look at it as fitting it around their vision as kind of like a portrait of how they, you know, want to live and what their tastes and values are. And it's kind of a different way of thinking about it. I guess that wasn't very articulate, honestly. Like, looking at how I thought about it.
No, you did. I mean, I totally understood what you just said. And,
I think
the comment you made on the phone was that you were talking a little bit also about how being a service-oriented firm versus kind of the starchitect model that we hear a lot about, because, I don't know, I mean, at least coming from a school like I did and that you did at Cornell, it's very, very theoretical. I mean, you're looking at Rem Koolhaas, Corbusier, it's not nuts and bolts,
Yeah.
and so...
Yeah. I mean, and I think that, the starchitects get such an overwhelming amount of attention, and people go to them to get like a product. And I think it is important to distinguish yourself by doing products and by showing what you're capable of. But I also think that where we are in this economy and where our generation is, because a lot of these firms are established and they're going to go on and on and on long after their founders, the original starchitect, died. How do you, as a one, person, working out of your apartment, trying to get somewhere and call, how do you kind of go from there? And I think one way is just like, to not look at the big picture sometimes and just to look at the people you're working with and give them what they're asking for, and not overcomplicate it, I guess.
So was that a big driving factor in your first project, the Bering project, was to create a product where you could differentiate yourself, where you could sort of say your stamp, this is what I'm capable of?
Yeah, I would say I look at the projects I do on spec like that a little bit as something to explore ideas for your, that you're interested in. Because I think that when I do a house for somebody, I try to listen and to understand what their idea is, before I start imposing my design agenda,
Yeah.
It's a different way of working. Yeah.
Definitely.
It's nice to be able to do both. I wish I could do both all the time and have, more kind of volume and capability, but we're working slowly by little,
And that strategy, it works out for you well. I mean, you found a nice balance there between your design education and what the clients come in wanting.
Yes, yeah. And, I admire sort of architectural academia. I wish I understood what they're talking about more. I mean, I'm so now.
Wait a second. I thought you always understood, Hilary. So it wasn't just me that was confused by all the artist speak?
I mean, I was pretty confused. I do follow now. I mean, a lot of the writing on pragmatism. That's something that immediately, about pragmatic architecture and, about kind of, I do think a little bit about what's our generation really about, because I think it's a little bit different. And I think that, compared to architects in the past who, whose careers have elapsed over periods of time where, our economy was booming for decades on decade and decade. I see, our generation not looking at that future, and I think it's going to be a different and a unique path,
And how do we deal with that? I mean, what is it for us? How?
I mean, I think part of that is you have to also see it as a business person, and you kind of have, I don't know why exactly, architectural education isn't necessarily suited to, business education, but it's not. I mean, it's a little bit more of it's less direct, and it's more of a process. And you kind of have to think about things two different ways. I mean, in my experience, my strategy is very much, on pleasing people and doing what people are asking for, not overthinking it, and being nice and making people happy, and didn't learn that at Cornell.
And not New York City?
No, I learned a little bit of that in New York City.
Nice. Now, there was something, Hilary, just to close up here, there's something you mentioned before that's very interesting. You actually have an accountability coach.
I do, yeah.
Right? And that is very fascinating. You said that was two. So you said that was a big part of your success. So tell other architects, tell other designers out there about that and why we should do that.
I mean, specifically, I'm working with Jeff Sherrar from Sherrar Studios, who also did Southtown Greenbound. So if you're looking for someone specific, he does counseling over the phone. Not to shield Jeff, but he's great.
And he's taking more clients.
Yeah.
He's open to new relationships. Okay.
Yeah, he is.
So you guys heard that, and tell us what Jeff does for you, so we can, other architects maybe considering it, can give him a call.
Well, Jeff talks to me on a weekly basis, and we keep track of my goals for the long term and the short term. We break goals up by a quarter, and we talk about them weekly and map out, strategies to get there. Those include, my financial goals, my goals for, bringing in new jobs, my goals for marketing and for my website and for my in-house projects, like my development projects that tend to take back seats sometimes to stuff that's for private clients. And it's helpful because, having that weekly routine helps me, not lose the big picture, which is so easy to do in the kind of hustle and bustle of, everyday craziness. So I highly recommend it, and he gives a great outsider's perspective. He is a very creative person, but he is not from architecture, and I think that can be helpful too. It's just somebody who's looking at what you're doing just as a business, just like any other.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll put that in the show notes, a link to his website and who he is, and then tell us what would one of those phone calls go like. Say for instance, I'm Jeff, and we're talking about. Or say you're Jeff, and we're talking about, how you're going to bring in more clients. Is he sort of mapping out goals? Okay, you need to talk to 50 people this week, or how does that sound? What's that conversation like?
Yeah, like we're keeping logs, and we're making sure that like people who refer us, I say thank you to, and that I mention I appreciate it. We're keeping track of which referrals we're getting and we're not getting. We've got, financial projections that we kind of try to break down by numbers of jobs that we need to go after, we need to bring in within such and such a time period, stuff like that,
Okay. Cool.
So it really is helpful, and he's a very nice person.
And then is he a videographer?
He is a videographer as well.
Okay. And what prompted you to do that amazing documentary for the Bering project? And how has that helped you?
It's been great. I ran into him at a destination wedding. His wife, Alex, is a good friend of mine, and we started talking, and he was talking about, he loves to work with small businesses. He loves to work with creative, professionals. And he was talking about his videography services, and I sort of had in mind a similar idea. I mean, I've always kind of been interested in video, and of course, I mean, I'm super low tech, so I have no actual skills to do it. So, we kind of worked out this concept of what to do, and I guess we talked about it for a while before, I guess about 4 or 5 months went by before he actually came to San Antonio to do it. And it was great. He was a great collaborator. I did write a lot of the questions and for the interviews that we were doing. But I was so pleased with like how he constructed the shots, and he edited it and had a great eye for like moments when people's personalities came out, because it was it is a marketing video, but it's also, a kind of a little, something that's educational, something that you could watch just out of interest and stuff. I mean, he has a view of marketing as something that's more sharing, more learning, and that to me is a little more appealing and a little more interesting than, magnets and business cards,
Absolutely. Interesting. Great. I think so, Hilary, and you're doing a good example of showing how it's done. So I encourage everyone to go check that out. And where do people go to see what you're doing? Let's just give them those websites again really quick.
Yeah, check out my website after Jeff gets through with it, actually.
Ooh la la.
But it's my business website is operativeventures.com. That's all lowercase, all one word. And Southtown Greenbound is southtowngreenbound.com.
All right.
So that's.
Someone go check that out. And Hilary, it's been an awesome conversation. Thank you for sharing your personal journey.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Enoch. And thank you for what you're doing and for setting up this forum for people to learn. I'm going to keep following your videos as well, and it's an honor to participate.
All right. Thanks, Hilary. Talk to you later.
Take care. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Well, that's it for today. If you like this video, please share it by clicking one of the share buttons. And to get updates when I post a new article, video, or podcast, visit businessofarchitecture.com, sign up for our email list, and I'll send you my exclusive ebook, Social Media for Architects.